Hey, welcome to Scratching the Surface. I'm Jared Fuller, and this is my podcast about design criticism and practice. On today's episode, I am talking to the designer, the creative director, and the publisher, Tony Brook. Tony is the co-founder and creative director of the award-winning London design studio Spin, and in 2010, along with Adrian Shaughnessy, he co-founded the design publishing venture Unit Editions. In this conversation, Tony and I talk about his early interest in design, from designing minimalist Christmas decorations for his class when he was 7 years old, to his early career designing music covers. And we also talk about how he started his studio and continues to reinvent it every few years, driven by his various curiosities. And then we also talk about how he started Unit Editions with Adrian and their goals for the books they produce and how they strive for making design history relevant to contemporary designers working today. I've long been a fan of Tony's work. I have a very vivid memory, actually, of discovering Spin when I was in college. And then when Unit Editions opened, I bought Studio Culture, which was one of their first publications. I bought it right away, so it was really great to chat with him about his really ever-evolving career and learn how he approaches his work, whether that's client work or personal projects or the publishing work through Unit Editions. I'm sure you've seen Tony's work, whether through projects like Spin or some of the really truly excellent books that Unit Editions has put out, including monographs on people like Herb Lubalin and Paula Scher. The work they are doing there is just really inspiring and, in my opinion, a great addition to the design discourse that seeks to deepen and enrich our work as designers. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Tony Brook. You know, like I was just saying, I've been a fan of your work as a designer for years. I especially remember a piece of your work that I remember very clearly was when you did the I guess it was when Print Magazine was inviting those guest designers, you know, maybe like 10 years ago or so, and you did that issue of Print Magazine. I remember I was in college at the time and just loved what you had done and have been kind of following your work pretty closely ever since. But I don't actually know much about your background and kind of how you got interested in design, and thought that might be a good way to kind of frame the discussion. So where'd your interest in design come from?
It was early. Well, how far do you want to go back, honestly?
As far as you want.
All right. Well, I was asked to do the Christmas decorations at school when I was about 7 years old.
Oh, wow.
And I came up with a very minimal solution for it, shall we say. It was basically a square with had an angle across it, and one quadrant was red and the other one was yellow, and repeat. And that was my solution for the Christmas decorations. But to be fair to the teacher, he went along with it, and I had a team of designers who helped me paint these squares, these quadrants, because I'd always thought that Christmas was a hellish mess, and that I loved the idea of cleaning it up and tidying it up. So.
And you were 7 years old, did you say?
Yeah,
that's amazing.
But I used to get sent out into the school. I wasn't very strong in math. I wasn't very good at math. So my teacher was very sympathetic. So he sent me out into the playground because I was quite good at drawing.
Okay.
And he would send me out to the playground, set everybody their math test, then come out and see me and talk to me about composition.
Okay.
So that was 7, 8 years old. And so he would be talking to me about Picasso's method of composition or something, which I didn't know Picasso was, so I had to go and find out.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I was very lucky. I had a lot of encouragement early on. But I remember a conversation when I was about 14 with my mother when it seemed like I might possibly be becoming an artist.
Okay.
And she put it very plainly in a Yorkshire kind of straightforward way. that if I planned on starving in, and never having any money, then an artist was a job for me.
Oh
But
yeah.
but there was something else I could possibly do, which was to become a commercial artist.
Mm.
And if I became a commercial artist, then I had a chance of a career and earning money. So
Yeah. Did
so I
you
didn't do bad.
did you know what that was at the time? Did you know what commercial art was, or what getting that reaction from your mom? What was that like?
Well, I didn't know what it was, but a commercial artist still meant that I'd be using my skills, and it also seemed like there was no choice. If I didn't do it, then I wouldn't be going to college. Therefore, I wouldn't be being supported in going to college.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it was take this advice and go to college, or don't, and
Right.
good luck to you.
Right. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. So I thought that discretion being the better part of valor, I'd take my mother's advice and went to college. And the funny thing was that at college, I started off. They started pushing me towards illustration.
Okay.
Because I could draw reasonably well, and then and that carried on for maybe 2 or 3 years. Then I fell madly in love with photography, and thought I could be a photographer. But really, ever since I was like tiny, like 4, 5, 6 years old, I was collecting stamps. I was collecting beer mats. I was collecting record sleeves. I was collecting anything that had graphic design on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it took me till the age of about 17, 18, and to realize that actually I was besotted with graphic design, and that I'd been surrounded with it all my life,
Yeah. That's so funny. I was the same way as a kid. I've told this story to a couple people that I've interviewed before, but I have a very distinct memory of being 4 or 5 years old, sitting in the shopping cart when my mom was grocery shopping and asking her why letters on different signs looked different. Like why was a 2 made different on this sign than this sign? And it wasn't until I was in much later that I was like, oh, this is that thing that I've been interested in my whole life.
It's an odd thing, and how powerful those images are. It's like when I was curating my stamp collection, I curated it an aesthetic value to me at that age, and it was really odd to find it again after 20 odd years. It got lost, and my father found it again, and I was looking through it, and what I'd done is I'd put everything that I considered ugly at the back, everything that I considered beautiful, and the most beautiful at the front. And I was judging them not so much on form necessarily, but on colours. But I wasn't aware that there was a human being was making these things.
Oh,
right. Not until I saw there were some stamps by David Gentleman, who's a fantastic British designer, and he designed some stamps for Winston Churchill for some kind of remembrance of Winston Churchill or something. But anyway, I looked at those, and for some reason the penny dropped, and I thought, that somebody's made that.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, like rather than just existing and not, me thinking they were beautiful, or they weren't beautiful. This was somebody's chosen those colors. Somebody's designed that. That was the first time I was aware of design, really.
And so, that's really interesting, and I'm curious about now when you were kind of in school studying this, and you started making these connections. Were all of those things from your childhood, formally or intellectually making their way into work that you were doing at the time?
No, that came much later. Because it took a long while for me to realize that could be a possibility, or actually that was even allowed as a possibility. Because so I went through college. I wasn't a particularly gifted student. I was quite. I was searching for myself. So I used to stay up till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning printing photographs and things like that. So I would work very, very hard, just not on necessarily what they wanted me.
Right.
so I was very committed and very passionate about it. But I remember this lecturer at the time, I asked them if we could design a record sleeve. We just finished a project designing train timetables, and it was really grueling and, pretty boring, to be honest. And I said, well, how could we do something more interesting like record sleeves? And this guy just mounted his high horse and said, look, do you know how many students come out every year? And I said, no. He says, about 60,000. God knows how much it is now. But he says, about 60,000. I said, do you know how many do record sleeves? No. It's about 4. So forget it.
Right.
I had the pleasure of meeting him in a pub about 3 years later and him saying, what are you doing? And I said, I'm designing record sleeves. So, don't give up your new dream.
Right. So, I mean, but that actually raises another question that I had kind of about your career before we kind of move into some unit edition things. But I was curious about the origins of Spin and I don't know exactly how to phrase this, the type of work that you were taking on kind of at the beginning and how you've built the studio and your design practice. How kind of intentional was that? Because I think the reason I ask is I do feel like the studio and you as a person and as a designer have a very particular point of view, and I'm kind of wondering if that was something that kind of happened organically or if that was a very conscious decision.
It was if I'll try to answer your question about how we started through Spin and then what happened.
Yeah, I do realize that was a bunch of questions.
There was a moment.
Okay.
When so I got to the age of, I don't know, 30, 31, 32, somewhere around there, and realized that there was a very specific moment where I was designing record sleeves, working for this company, and I went to visit AVL, which is Associated Virgin Labels as it was then. And I walked through the door. I was just walking through the door, and Iggy Pop walked the other way out of the door. Now, Iggy Pop's always been a hero of mine. I absolutely adore him. He's amazing. And my first thought on seeing Iggy Pop walk through the door was, wow, Iggy Pop. And then it was, wow, you look really old. And then I thought, I'm probably really old. I'm too old to be doing this. Oh, now, wow. he's gone on to make a lot of great records since then, to be fair to him. But I felt like I was way too old to be designing record sleeves, and that I didn't want that to be it. I didn't want to design record sleeves to be the end of it.
Oh, okay.
Then it started to seem like a ghetto to me. Like it took two couple of years certainly before I got out, but it seemed like a ghetto. It seemed like I was stuck doing this thing. But I love music. I love record sleeves, but it seemed like I wanted more out of life. And then I started working for this other company, and it started getting a little bit broader, but still not broad enough. And then I set up Spin, with the express intent of broadening my horizons and my range of work.
Oh, okay.
Then what I did was for 2 years, I read this little leaflet from a bank, which said that most new businesses go out of business after 18 months and then 2 years. So I put those 2 dates down.
Okay.
And I thought, right, I don't care what I have to do. For 2 years, for 18 months, I'm going to survive. And then 2 years, I'm going to survive.
Yeah.
Now, so we did anything we were asked to do, we did. It was about just survival.
Right.
About getting used to being in a studio. But after 2 years, there was a moment where I said, right, is that it? Is this what we do? Because this isn't enough for me. This is like we've done it, we've achieved it, but I want to make better work. I want us to be working with better clients and stuff. So we resigned most of the clients that we had.
Oh wow.
And they were some stinkers.
I can't imagine.
No, they were terrible. Some of the work that we did for them was dreadful. It wasn't going in the right direction at all. So I made a decision that we were going to drop these clients, and also we're going to move into a larger studio, which doesn't seem the brightest move.
Yeah.
But anyway, I often say this in talks I do is that there's a Kevin Costner quote that I use quite a lot, which is build it and they will come.
Right.
And And they did.
Yeah.
The first people through the door were Levi's, and following on hard on their heels were Nike and Diesel, and we started getting
Wow. Yeah.
which is a very cool station in the UK, and we just started getting work, and it was so lucky. I mean, it's insane what we did, really. But so, and from that, I started to realize that my background and my interests and the things that I liked, I started listening to them acutely,
Mm-hmm.
rather than being some background noise. That I was really listening to the voices in my mind.
Right. Right.
What do I love? What do I like? What do I want to see being made? What do I want to try and do? And so that started on this on where Spin's been heading ever since, I suppose. But we periodically reinvent ourselves.
Okay.
So we were 30 odd people. We were doing work for Nike. We were drowning in it. It's be careful what you wish for, really. We were doing big campaigns for big companies, and I was really getting unhappy about it. And said, I want to be a small design studio. I want to be a design studio that's focusing on creativity. Mm-hmm. So we reduced ourselves. Very traumatic time, but we reduced ourselves down to 12 people.
Okay. Wow.
And resigned the big, the big clients, because it wasn't that it wasn't I thought there was anything wrong with working for Nike or Levi's or anything like that. It's just that we were doing regional and European and global campaigns, and for Nike, for Levi's, for all these different people, and they are huge, and they take so much managing, and so that I just started realizing that I turned into a manager, and I wasn't really thinking about design anymore.
Yeah.
So, it's funny because I'm just talking about this now. We're actually just moving today, and tomorrow we're moving into a new studio.
Oh wow!
Which I'm sat in at the moment, which is a small studio at the bottom of a garden, and it's we've always wanted to try and experiment and move ourselves on, and so this move is expressly with that in mind.
Oh, that's so interesting. I have one other quick question, and then this actually leads really nicely into some things I wanted to talk to you about unit editions. But you had mentioned working on these kind of global campaigns, and that you had become a manager instead of a designer in a lot of ways. And it's interesting that all of this was happening kind of as you move into a bigger studio, kind of end your relationships with all your old clients. Had you done campaigns and design work at that scale before, or is this kind of all new to you at the time? Okay.
Well, what happened was, I'll tell you exactly how it happened. Curiosity is how it happened.
Yeah.
There was some new media stuff coming through at that point, and myself and some of the other designers, we were curious about what this meant, and so we started dabbling in that, and we built a little CD-ROM called Spin, which had a spin radio on it, which all the records was spin. So it was we built a CD-ROM, and that tells you how long ago it was, and it that went down very well, and we did it up for ourselves. It was a self-initiated project. Somebody saw it at Diesel and took us on to do something similar for them. Then from that, we started making motion graphics, because we were making motion in the CD-ROM. So we started doing little bits of film for ourselves with typography. And then Channel 4 saw that and asked us to come in and look at their identity. So then we were suddenly doing a national television identity, without any experience of that at all.
Yeah.
And that seems, and it's the same thing has happened with unit editions. Is another self-initiated project.
Right. I mean, it makes a lot more sense hearing kind of all of these other steps and this kind of curiosity and really just kind of following what your interests are and letting your interests drive. Suddenly, unit edition seems like a very natural next phase of that career. How did that come about?
Well, we just finished. There were a couple of things that coincided. We'd just finished a book for a conventional publisher. The first time we'd done one, really.
Okay.
Because we'd done a lot of art monographs, and we got our skills to make a book. It was all there, but we hadn't done a commercial book, and we did a book for a commercial, a British-based commercial publisher on design, on logos.
Okay.
And I'm sure for people who work in that world, it was a perfectly reasonable experience. But for me, it was so difficult. There were tiny little decisions were taken out of my hands all the way through. What paper stock would go on the cover, what material would be included. I considered myself a reasonable authority on identities.
Yeah.
So I couldn't see why I was arguing about some disgusting identity that the author wanted to put in. It just mystified me. It was like, but anyway, so and at the end of doing this book, we realized that we'd paid for the privilege of doing the book. We weren't paid enough to cover the wages of doing the book. So I thought, I thought, if I'm going to lose money, I'd much rather lose it doing something I really believed in, rather than doing something for somebody else where I don't know whether they made any money out of it or not. I don't know. So we decided, and at the same time, I was really uncomfortable with the amount of money that we were spending on entering design awards, because they were very, very expensive. And we were winning some. We were getting our pencils and our rolls, whatever. Yeah. But we weren't. It didn't seem to affect the bottom line. We weren't getting calls from people who'd seen that award-winning book.
Interesting.
It wasn't affecting the projects we were getting. And so what I decided to do was to spend the money that we'd allocate a certain amount of money each year towards self-promotion in some way, and it was usually through these awards. It was kind of low-hanging fruit. So we decided to put that money into making something for ourselves, and we researched something that we could make for ourselves, and ended up making a newspaper format thing. So it was on the first one we did was on Spin, and we sold it on our website with no PR or anything. We didn't announce it. We just put it up on the website. I don't know what I expected, but the first three orders were from Sweden, France, and Argentina.
Oh, wow.
So this is before Google Analytics. So I had no idea that people were even looking at our website in those countries.
Right.
And then that sold out. And then we produced another one, which was on a designers' reading list, 50 designers' reading lists. So reading lists, reading required reading for students.
Right. Yeah.
And that sold out. And then we did one on punk 70 singles, and that sold out. And then I met Adrian on a show that he used to have called Graphic Design on the radio.
Right. Yeah.
And after that conversation, we went to the pub for a pint, and I said to him that I was thinking of publishing based on these three papers that had gone so well. I was thinking of doing some publishing, and he'd been thinking about a similar thing. Okay. And so I said, well, why don't we do it together? I mean, it seemed like he got all the writing skills, and we got all the design skills. So. And so we said we'd give it a go. And that's how Univision started.
And so it literally, because something I was curious about is if you had done as a studio, any kind of publishing work before, and it really was just these kind of experimental kind of newspapers.
Yeah, I mean, those were that's what gave me that's what personally Adrian had a big selling book and how to be a graphic designer without losing your soul.
Right.
But we'd had experience doing this design book, and I think I understood something. There's something I learned from that process. That was that publisher did not understand designers. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. He didn't understand what would get them excited, and the writer didn't either. Very capable writer, very capable publisher, both very successful.
Yeah.
But I don't believe that either of them knew what conversations you needed to really put your ears up and listen to regarding designers.
Right.
And Adrian has got a long history in design. Mm-hmm. I do too. We have, I'm a collector, and I've been a collector since the stamps.
Yeah.
It carried on.
Yeah.
My collection's carried on all the way through, and so we're finding to our cost now. They're trying to move studio. What my collection means is that I've got a shitload of stuff. So, I've got a lot of material, and so that's informed some of the books that we've done. But I think that the strength of unit editions is that we're a response to something as well in the design world, which was that we at the time. I felt, whether fairly or unfairly, that there were a lot of books being produced that weren't well written.
Right.
The content, the written content, wasn't equal to the visual content, and that there was a lot of eye candy. And I know through my collecting that there's some just brilliant stories stuff, and I love the idea of design celebrating itself. Mm-hmm. Of digging out these stories, digging out these individuals, finding out what they were about.
Yeah.
Representing their work to the world or representing it to the world. And one thing that we tend to be really keen on is their contemporary relevance.
Yes.
So when the way that we design the book, the way we approach the book, is we're looking at someone that you as a designer ought to know about.
Yeah.
You need to know that person.
Yeah.
They're going to make a difference.
That was something that I was very curious about talking to you about, because I think I have the unit edition site pulled up, and you have right on the site that kind of the editorial statement is to throw a spotlight on on overlooked areas of graphic design, as well as landmark figures, and putting them in a historical context, or putting them in a contemporary context. Putting historical designers in a contemporary context. Sorry. How do you, I'm very curious about kind of how you think about that editorial direction, and how you kind of, I don't know, I guess kind of the process of kind of producing a book like that, and, from kind of how are you picking your subjects, and then how are you kind of looking at them through a lens of today? Because I'm sorry this question got very big, but I think it relates to what you're talking about with collecting and history, and that oftentimes kind of design history can be seen as this thing that's just, a bunch of objects from the past, but to make them relevant and to show that we can learn something from them today is something that I think a lot of design books don't do, which is why I think your work is so interesting to a lot of people.
Well, I think that there's a story behind every single book, and there's an aim, and there's been a dialogue that we've had before every single book. And if I've got an idea for a book, quite rightfully, I get challenged, and through those discussions we find out where our attitude is and what we're looking for. But it's all cleared up before we've made a step forward with any of the books. So if you look at, say, for instance, if you look at a monograph, then you're looking at something that's an individual that has a particularly rich story. Because we were told flatly that monographs don't sell by conventional publishers, like just forget it, doesn't happen. And that's just not true. We just don't sell 20,000 of them. We sell two.
Right, right.
But that's enough for us. That's great. 2,000 interested people's better than 20,000 not that bothered.
Yeah.
So the individuals that we choose, they've always, there's something in common with. They all have something in common, which is that they've all had really interesting, quite often quite meandering career paths.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I think that there's an underlying thing there, which is there isn't one route to success, and that they're wonderfully inspiring stories that they have to tell. And I would say F.H.K. Henrian, Lance Wyman, Paula Scher, they've all got tremendous stories behind them. So they're in of themselves, fascinating people that have made this stellar work. Now, for me, it's always really important that you can feel a connection with that work, because if you don't feel a connection with it, it just looks like stellar, impossible work. I remember I read this thing by Saul Bass. It was a commentary on a presentation he made, and he was telling these students how designers can, in practice, made it look like they just clicked their fingers and this amazing thing was handed down on a tablet of stone from a shining light, and they could never achieve this. And I just hate that. So there's an element of demystification, but there's also a wonderfully rich story that's attached to these people that is worth telling. And then you get the other ones, like things like Type Only and Type Plus, where that was a decision to look at, because I collect a lot of old stuff, right? But I was really excited by what was going on, and we're both aware that we don't want to be the History Channel, that we're only looking at ancient history. It's really important to us that we look at contemporary design as well and find opportunities to talk about that. So those two books were about the effect that computers have had on typography. Mm-hmm. And we made it a point. We gave every single person who came to do an internship for UNIT, we gave them that job, the job of finding something for that book. And we wanted every single country that we could possibly get in there, so as broad as possible. And it's a phenomenal record of the time after the Big Bang of computers. When beforehand it was a tiny trickle of predominantly men who were making these kind of very careful, structured, quite refined work. But it was a very niche, narrow interest. I mean, they made some spectacular work. I'm not decrying the work at all. It's fantastic, but it was a very niche, narrow interest. And then the computers came along, and now the answer to nearly everything is typography. And it's expressive typography, and it's crazy typography. I mean, I actually made a point while we were going through that. I made a point of trying to pick stuff that made me feel slightly queasy. I just didn't understand that. But I mean, to be fair, I'm like that with music as well. It's like I can listen to something for the first time and think, what the hell is this? And then second time, it's the best album I've ever heard. So I figured that was likely to happen with things that made me profoundly uncomfortable. It weren't easy. That I didn't, that it wasn't, well, they would like that, wouldn't they? They're designers. It was provocative is what.
Right. That's interesting. I wanna go back to what you were saying about monographs for a second, because I think the monographs that Unit Edition has done are very interesting to me. I love them all. I have not spent as much time with the Paula Scher one. I looked through it in a bookstore here in New York, but it was great, obviously. But what I think is interesting about the monographs, especially, but really about all of your books, is much like the studio. I feel like there's a very specific point of view, and so the Paula Scher one was interesting to me in that she's a living designer who's still working today, and it felt like her, but it also felt like you, if that makes sense. And I think that's interesting because so many monographs today are kind of designed by the designer that it's for, and the texts that are in it are by the designer that it's for, and so it's just, it basically becomes in some ways like a kind of glorified portfolio. And you kind of always go against that, and I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about that, and kind of that kind of editorial direction about what goes into a monograph for a living designer.
That could have, well, for Lance is a living designer.
Yeah, true. That's true. That's a great point.
He's I just hasten to say that. He's for Lance. We sat and listened to stories. Adrian did a really long, exhaustive, in-depth interview with him, and we spent 2 weeks on his floor, basically in his house, shooting all the stuff for the book. Myself and Adrian.
Yeah.
And it was a really fantastic experience. He didn't say anything. He just let us get on with it.
Oh, interesting.
Which is fine, but slightly unnerving as well.
Yeah.
But with Paula, I mean, I've known Paula for a long time, so it's we're very good old friends, really. And so I was initially concerned about asking her whether she'd be interested in us doing a book for her, but she was incredibly lovely about it and very flattered that we were asking, which was surprising to me, because I was thinking, you'd be up Paula Scher, why wouldn't we be talking?
Yeah.
But we had a lot of meetings. She's very actively involved in her work. She really lives her work. So I was really I wanted her to be happy with it, but she wanted her instruction with you design it.
Okay.
Right. So and you curate it. So because I didn't know as much about her projects as some of the projects I knew very well, but some I didn't know as well. So we'd have lots of discussions about, well, that could go in or that couldn't go in, or not that, but this or that, toing and froing. But ultimately, the design of the book, she left it to us, to me and the design team at Unit. We basically made the book.
Yeah.
And what the most pleasing thing about that was that there's nothing I want to take out when I'm looking through it. There's nothing I want to take out. It's a really full story, and I think that Adrian's interview with her is fascinating. She's a fascinating person generally. She's incredibly stellar there. But for me, coming from the UK and not necessarily grown up with her work, she's not really famous Paula to me.
Right.
She's just a really good friend. I said that in the book at the end of it, but it's really true. She's hilarious company. She's great to be with, and but I was worried that she wouldn't be able to let me do the book that I needed to do, and she really did.
Oh, that's great.
It was fantastic. It's fantastic. But is working with I would say that for generally living designers, we were very lucky. We found two very, very cool ones. I I would say that most of the time they should do their own book. And we've actually done a book on spin.
Right.
The spin monograph was about, we were trying to think of someone who could show an archetype for a contemporary monograph, a monograph that wasn't a headstone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not like, and that was it.
Yeah.
Story told, and they're now dead. So that was really carefully constructed to give a sense of a living studio working day to day.
Right.
What kind of issues what kind of issues we have, what kind of solutions we can, what kind of things we're asked to do. It ended up being a lot bigger than it needed to be, possibly, but
no, I don't think so.
Well, but I would say that I would love to find that we've got some people we'd like to talk to about that. But the idea of making contemporary monographs, which nobody else would make that. We understand the problem with the vanity publishing, with the portfolio, with all it's all got. We understand that that's completely not an option, but all I would say is all the responses that I've had back through social media and what have you about that book have been the kind of ones that I would have hoped to have got.
Yeah.
So it's worked out. And to be honest, people are going to throw stones, quite rightfully so sometimes. And there was a time when I was scared to put my head above the parapet and
Yeah.
But you just got to roll with the blows, really. So I'm sure that we're doing things with the right kind of thought behind them, the right feeling behind them. So hopefully that shows.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the spin book is an incredible kind of object. Both as a physical book, but then the content I think is just kind of incredible and very, like you said, very different than a lot of monographs in a way. And I think the Paula one is great also. I think he succeeded definitely in kind of what you set out to do for both of those. I'm curious how you think about the audience for these books, or what you even know about kind of the unit edition customer. Are they, I assume that they're primarily in the design field?
As far as I know.
Okay.
As far as I know, they are. But not necessarily, can't all be, but I think primarily they are. I know that they're really responsive. There's an element of trust which is really, really humbling.
Yeah.
They will come up with somebody that they've never really heard before, or they don't really know that much about, and they'll go with it.
Yeah.
And it's just fantastic that, and we're really working hard to keep the physical beauty of the books going, because I mean, I don't know about you, but whenever I get a book, you've got to stroke it and smell it a little bit.
Yep.
There's that aspect of it, but if that was all they were, then they would be only half of what they are. It's the fact that there's really strong research and really great stories going into them. I think that's really the key.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to kind of what you were saying about working with that publisher before and them not understanding designers. That I think is probably kind of something that really helps you, is that between you and Adrian, it's from what I've gathered, it sounds like the content and design is really kind of happening together in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it is. And I would say that I don't hold it against those publishers.
Right.
It's not their fault. They're not designers. It's not their fault. But I did think that there was something missing.
Right.
That's all. I could see that there was something missing. That there was they're still doing very well. They're doing great.
Yeah.
They're selling their books. It's just that I just felt that there was an aspect missing that we could possibly fill. I didn't realize that it would be so big or so if we're sticking to our guns, and we're still solvent.
Right.
So, it's good.
Right. Yeah. I have just a couple more questions to kind of wrap it up. I think these will be kind of, a little just kind of quick questions. But one more just to kind of follow up on the audience question and kind of connecting to kind of the design and content together is something I've found just in the people that I've talked to for this podcast and kind of in my own research around the design books that are kind of on the market right now is how many kind of contemporary design books seem like they're geared towards students or young designers and are, kind of how to or things like that. And I feel like that's not something that you guys are interested in.
No, if you read Lance Wyman or you read Polish, you find out they did it.
Yeah,
they'll know how they did it. But I mean, it's not. I hate the idea of patronizing.
Right. That's what I was getting at.
I just find it really, really insulting. These are smart, intelligent people that we're talking to.
Right.
Now, it's different whether they can afford, because some of our books are expensive because of the nature of our business. I wish they were cheaper.
Yeah.
But we, like say for instance, Herb Ballon.
Right.
Which is the one. So we've done the big book, we did the little book, we've done an even smaller book.
Right.
Somewhere along the line, a student will pick up one of those and be inspired by Herb Ballon.
Mm-hmm.
They could be inspired by his work, or they could be inspired by his attitude. You could absolutely hate Herb Ballon's work and still get so much out of it. It's an original figure.
Right.
Now, all those iterations of that book have sold really well, and I would love to think that a student of design will come in, and this is happening. This is happening. If you look at Instagram at the moment, we've got. I put a picture of some file copies of the hard drive, big hardback of Ballon, and there's so many people there saying that they would love to get that book. So we've got to look at that. We're going to look at that because I guess that when it was out, they couldn't afford it. Now they can. They're going, we want it.
Right.
Whereas, and they don't. What we found from our audience mainly is that they want the book. They don't want just a book.
Right.
They want the book. So we start with the book. Still like the idea of doing this kind of slightly cheaper diffusion range, if you like, of affordable books.
Yeah.
And I think we should carry on doing that because, I remember being a student, but I also remember being massively overdrawn from buying books. So
right.
I do sympathize with them.
Yeah. I'm curious how now being a publisher has changed your design practice and the work that you're doing for clients. Has anything that you've learned or through kind of that editing process changed how you work for other clients at all?
I don't know. What I do know is that the work at Spin is becoming more experimental and it's changed markedly over the last year with some new projects coming out and very soon they'll show this, but we've become much more confident in what we're doing and much happier to push things further.
Right.
And I think that has to happen with unit editions as well. I think that making more interesting and more innovative responses to the material has got to be the way forward. Right. If we start resting on our laurels and start thinking that we've somehow made it, we're in big trouble.
Right.
Because we're a small, bespoke publishers, and our audience. This much I know about our audience: they like nice books.
Yes.
They don't, so they're not going to want anything that's less than
right.
Pretty damn good. So
right. My last question is, this podcast kind of at a very high level is about design criticism, and it's about kind of how we talk about design and the kind of discourse around the graphic design profession. And I'm curious, as someone who is, through being a publisher, someone who's very much involved in that and is kind of putting things out into the world around what we talk about, are there topics, designers, kind of issues facing contemporary design that need a spotlight turned on them right now, or you feel like are kind of not really being talked about?
Well, the thing that's exercising me and a lot of designers at the moment, I guess, but I just talk from my own perspective, obviously.
Yeah,
is the hellish criticism that anything new gets. Like somebody decides to change their logo.
Right.
And I know that I'm sure lots of people mention this, but people they lose their minds over it.
Yeah.
It's like someone's killed their dog or something. Right. And it's like give it a break, just I think that we need newness in the world. We don't, when this the nostalgia thing leaves me absolutely cold. I know that's funny. That sounds strange because we're looking back sometimes into design.
Right.
But we're looking at it from a contemporary point, genuinely from a contemporary point. We're seeing it as radical work, or the work that can inspire radical work, and inspire different, new, fresh work. Yeah.
Right.
It's so important that it's an industry that can easily become very self-satisfied. And I've seen it happen. Become very self-satisfied, very uncritical, and I mean in the sense of uncritical of itself, conservative.
Right.
Like when that whole thing about Helvetica is the only typeface you can use, and if you use anything else, then you're an idiot.
Right.
Kind of that. It's that the kind of like insane criticism of new identities. It's like, give them a chance, let them grow, let them get there. But because I really believe that the world has changed an awful lot, and that identities are my big thing.
Right.
Personally. And I talk about visual language and living, breathing identities that can change depending on what situation they're in, and not monochromatic, stamps, but living, breathing design. And that's super exciting, and it's a great area to be in. But I really don't understand. I can't connect to this needing to throw, bombs at new logos. It's just insane to me.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I love that. That's, music to my ears. I feel like one of the recurring themes of these conversations is that, there's more people who are kind of talking about design than ever before, and anybody comes out with a new logo and everyone immediately has a reaction. And kind of what I'm hoping for in these conversations is to talk to people who are a little bit slower and more considered in their criticisms about these things, and looking at history to kind of understand how we should work today. And I think that, all of your work, whether it's through Spin and Unit Editions, is very much kind of in keeping with that kind of mentality. And I love, it goes without saying, but I love kind of all the work that you do. And I'm a big fan of all the Unit Edition books that I have. And so I just want to thank you for this conversation and for all the work you do. This was so fun for me.
It's been a joy. It's been great, really great. Peter Ustinov used to say that he liked being interviewed because he found out what he thought.
Yeah.
And it's done the same for me. It's really great.
Good. This episode was recorded on July 12th, 2017. Our theme music is by Andy Borgasani. We're on Twitter and Instagram at Surface Podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcasts and SoundCloud and at scratchingthesurface.fm. Thanks for listening.